So again, this is Hilary Stoupa. I'm a developer with Qdabra software and an InfoPath MVP. And today we're going to talk about some of the complexities of parent-child relationships in SharePoint and ways that we can manage those complexities in InfoPath. So without further ado, let me go to my next slide here. Obviously you need audio. We use audio through the webinar. We're going to do a presentation with a little demo and have some time for questions and answers. I'll try to be done with my demo portion by 8:30. And sometimes I talk a lot, so I might go a little over. And just post questions as you have them, and we'll have a question-answer session at the end. So most of our data in the real world has relationships. There's very rarely an occasion where we have data that's not related to any other data. And a lot of those relationships are one-to-many relationships or parent-child relationships where we have orders and those orders have details. We have customers and those customers have contacts. And even though it's common in real-world data, we don't generally see it in people's demos, for example, because, real-world data isn't as demo-friendly as the made-up data that doesn't have these kinds of complicated relationships. In SharePoint lists, it can be a little complicated to maintain these relationships. Now, you can use lookups in SharePoint to help you maintain those relationships, but you still end up needing to go to multiple lists to manage all these items, which can be complex sometimes for your users. And we can understand their pain. When we're designing these solutions, we're like, well, I wouldn't want to have to go to one list to enter my orders and then another list to enter my order details either. I totally understand why you don't like this. And there's an assortment of SharePoint Designer approaches that you'll find out on the web. And many of those are valid approaches, and you may find that they suit your needs. Mostly today what I want to talk about is an InfoPath approach that uses qRules, but I'm also going to show you one SharePoint approach, and I am in no way, shape, or form going to argue that this is the best SharePoint approach. It's a little kludge I put together the other day, and it was just to kind of get a feel myself for what the complexities were. I did leverage InfoPath Designer and modified my most child most table, or most child most list, to use a different approach in the InfoPath form that I'm using for it, and we'll talk about that. As I mentioned before, you can always enter your parent item in its list and go to the child list and enter the details, and you'll see in the SharePoint web part solution that I show you that I have not successfully addressed that issue. Another option is to use InfoPath with qRules. If you've used qRules, you'll know what it is. If you haven't used qRules, the quick overview is it is a code library of functions that you can add to your form without actually having to write code. And so it gives you the power of code without needing the knowledge of code. Or even if you have knowledge of code and can write code, it prevents you from having to write code from scratch for every single form, so it saves you some time. qRules has a command that allows you to submit items to a SharePoint list, and you can leverage this command in its current incarnation to submit and manage parent-child items. The 4.2 release, we're really working hard to optimize this experience, so look forward to some changes there. Some of them are still in process, so I don't want to speak to what the final incarnation is going to be, but using this approach can give you complete control over your form design, of course. When you've got a list form, a SharePoint list form, instead of a full InfoPath form, you've got some restrictions there. With a full InfoPath form, you can find ways to manage your data, especially if you're leveraging qRules for your SharePoint submit, as well as be able to have all of the features you might need, including being able to add fields easily, use other qRules functions to add complicated form logic. All of these things are available to you. So I'm going to give you my demo now. I'm going to try to remember to share out my screen. I've been known in the past to forget that, but I'm really focused on remembering that today instead of leaving you staring at the slides while I think I'm doing something that you can see. And first I'm going to show you my little mashup that I created in my web part page. And for some of you who are probably like SharePoint gurus, you're going to find this laughable and kindergartenish, which is good because it instills a sense of humility in me, which is probably much needed. And then I'm going to show you my InfoPath solution, which to me is a much more elegant and refined solution. So let me do as promised and actually remember to share my desktop. So I'd say one of the big challenges I ran into with my SharePoint approach is I wanted to modify my order details form. So hopefully everybody can see me now. I'll look up here just in case somebody needs to pop up a question, or if somebody can't see my desktop, turn your feedback to red or something. Okay, I'm going to assume that everyone can see my desktop. So the real issue I'd say I ran into here, well, one of the real issues I ran into here was in my order details form. My order details form here is just an InfoPath form. It's a SharePoint list form. I'm using an InfoPath form web part to display a particular view of this SharePoint list form. And what I did was I modified the form logic so that when the order number field was set, it ran a query to get back the correct details for that order number. And the place I had the most difficulty with the logic was figuring out when I needed to run the query, because what I wanted to be able to do here was, select a row and then have it return the actual items for that, the actual details for that row. And at that point, I need to requery. But also, if I insert a new item, I need that new item to have the same order number as all of the existing items. So that logic beat me up a little bit, I confess, until I managed to get it right. And we'll take a quick look at the form. But what I've done here is in this web part page, I added a list filter. And this list filter uses my customer list. And so from here, I can select a customer. That list filter is then filtering my orders list. And this is just a view of my orders list. So it has all of my existing orders. My orders list, I can send a row, and I'm sending a row to this InfoPath web part form that has my order details. So if I send this row, for example, to my order details, you can see I get all of these particular details, and I can insert an item. And I've added, a secondary data connection to my products that returns the unit price and populates that, because I don't want to have to type that in. I mean, that's, the products is another relationship, right? We want to make sure we're using some sort of integrity here in our relationships. So if I were to change this, you can see I've added escargot, which, it's breakfast time where I live, so I'm certainly thinking about snails. And then if I add a discount here, so let's pay attention to what I've done, and I'm speaking for myself because it's early for me. I've added a discount to the middle item, and I've added a fifth item. And then I go ahead and I submit. I set my form to stay open after submit, but I'll just switch back to this top order and then back again to my bottom order. And we can see that, we've got our discount that we added, and we've got our new item that we added. And so this was, given daily lifetime constraints, this was kind of the best I could come up with quick and dirty SharePoint web parts, no customization in SharePoint Designer or anything like that. So if we go look at the order details form real quick, I'll just show you the logic that I added here. Now, if you haven't used InfoPath form web parts in a web part page, I would encourage you to check them out, because they do let you, if you're using a list form, you can pass data in from other web parts to a field in that list form, which is basically what I did. Yes. Okay, I added a new field to my order details since I worked with this. I added a field called order lookup because my order number wasn't actually a lookup. At any rate, this is my special view that I added. I set my InfoPath form, so if we go here, edit item is still the default view, you know, your regular old edit item. I changed it to manage multiple items so that I could have a repeating section, and then I created my somewhat unattractive order details view. And the big place, I have to show the advanced view. I just can't deal with that limited field set that it's showing. The big place I made changes was right here on order number. I added some rules, and the rule is to get details. So look at this condition and you'll understand what I'm saying about here's where I had a little bit of a struggle, was understanding when I needed to run this query. And what I'm doing is I'm running the query if the count of order number is equal to 1 and order number is not blank. So in other words, if the only instance of order number changes, I can probably safely assume that was passed in from my web part connection, right? And then my other query is if order number is not blank, created is not blank, and the count is greater than 1. And that was so that if I had, let me pop back over here. If I had the form in this state, it's got all the information from this record. I had to make sure it was going to requery when I selected a new record. And I was having problems with that. But I don't want it to requery when I add a new item. So when I insert item here, I'm also setting order number. And what I was doing was I was clicking insert item. It was immediately requerying for all the existing details, and my new item would disappear. So that was fun for me, right? And so that's what this big condition is about, is just getting this thing to query at the right time. And you can see I'm just setting my order number query field, and I'm running a query, and that's to return my details. So I'd say that was the trickiest part there. And don't save, just leave me alone. And if we look at my page real quick in Edit View, and then I'll move on to the prettier one, I promise. And I'm sure, like I said, I'm sure those of you who do a lot of SharePoint Designer like giggling, and that's okay. I don't mind having my sophomoric efforts giggled at. So here's my InfoPath form web part, and really this is the thing I want you to see if you haven't used these. If we edit our web part, and you know, of course, we can't be smart about it here. We have to scroll, and then we have to scroll in order to find things. You can see I selected my my list or library, but then you can select the view to display by default. And so that's where I selected my special edit details. So the original view is still the default in the list. This new view that I created special for this web part page is the one I'm displaying here. So moving on to my other sample. This website, by the way, is created off of a Northwind template. And you can see by this mess over here in libraries that it's kind of my go-to test site. And the reason is because this template uses the old school Northwind database. I mean, stuff is like from the 90s, and there's no email addresses, but it's a template you can find online. Drop me an email if you need a link to it. And it's a Northwind SharePoint site template. And what this great guy has done is set up this site template that has all the Northwind data. So you populate it, and you've got all these connected lists, and it's awesome. So I created a form that I've published up here as a browser form, and it's kind of managing the same structure, right? We've got customers, we've got orders, we've got order details. And in this form, I'm using qRules, the Submit to SharePoint list feature, to be able to kind of handle this same relationship. Although in my web part page, you could see, you probably noticed, I hadn't done anything special with my orders list. It was something that I was, thinking about, didn't have time to get to, and I didn't even really have a clear concept of how I could approach this with just this web part to web part mashup-y, no SharePoint Designer, no fancy stuff. I think, probably my best bet was still going to be to add a new item and then have to click the little guy here, the little join the row guy, in order to get the information into my order details. He wouldn't have returned any details. I would have had to, add new details from there. So I didn't have a good scenario for that, honestly. This was my best quick and dirty scenario that I could come up with. This is my qRules sample form, and from here I can select an existing customer or create a new customer, and then I can select an existing order or create a new order. So first we'll just select an existing customer, and we do a lot of this sending data to the server in this particular form, but I wanted to show it to you in the browser. Just since I know browser forms are in heavy use and will continue to be. This is my list of orders. I just have the date and the order number here. You could do something different. And then I've got an option here to edit it. Again, adding a button was a choice. You could set it up to just pull back the details when that order number changed. So now here I've got all of the order information and all of the order details. You'll see this when we look at the form itself. But I'm copying this data into my main data source. So with qRules, we have to have stuff in the main data source to submit it to a SharePoint list. It's not terribly painful to copy it in. So I've copied in everything into my main data source so I can address it. And I'm going to make a note of which order I'm working with here so we can go back to it. So it's 10952, because otherwise I'll look at that drop down again and I'll get all confused. And so we'll change his shipping. He changed his mind. In this we had the address wrong. This is actually 58. And he needs a new item. And again, we'll probably just go with the escargot. Where are the escargot? Oh, we've lost the escargot. That's okay. I don't have them alphabetized. We'll just give him whatever's at the top. And we'll do a quantity of 6 and no discount for him. And I'm just going to save this. So what my save is doing is it's using submit to SharePoint list to update first the order, and then it's using submit to SharePoint list to update the order details list. So that at this point would include just adding a new item. And look, my form remembered which one I had, so I could just click my button again to show everything. And again, this could be done on the change of the order number. So here is my information, and we can see my gumbo mixes there. You don't know this because I haven't shown you the form in design mode, but what I was doing was actually requerying the details list. I can also add, a new order here. Again, this is... if the form feels a little clunky, it's just the logic I used, and you can definitely do something different. And so I'm going to use a big number that I think has not been used before. And I should have defaulted the customer, but I didn't. We'll just grab him here. And, enter some basic information. And it looks like I also did not manage to clear my row. I think I've got a pushback issue. What's your guess? But that's okay. We'll just let this guy order some different stuff. I'll just manually delete these. Yes. Oh, great. It's going to give me a pop-up for every single one, isn't it? That is pleasing. And we'll just remove. I think I have a post-back issue here. We'll go look at the form in design mode and see how badly I hacked it up there. And then we'll insert an item because you guys just haven't had enough fun yet, and I'm sure this is completely gripping. And we will grab a product, anything, and I do not have any idea what this might be, but I think it could be gummy bears, which I'm most fond of. And we'll just tab and save. So now we've got a new order. It's a great big number, so we'll be able to find it in our drop-down when our drop-down refreshes, which it's obviously not going to do until I reselect. So you'll just have to trust me that this is some clunkiness on my part with my post-back settings. Let's see what we've got here for our orders now. And it's still not there, so I've done something wrong. Let's go look at the form in design mode and see if we can figure it out. So here we've got our form in design mode. and we're selecting our customer. We've got an edit button and we've got a save button. And if we manage our rules here, I've got a submit to SharePoint rule, and it's just running my qRules command to submit to SharePoint. We're going to do the form in preview because I know it works that way, right? And so we're submitting, we're using an ID, so that way I can either edit the customer or I can create a new one. If you pass in the ID parameter, it indicates which one you want. And then here's my orders, and again I've got rules on my button, and that is going to set these order fields in the main data source. And you'll see here that I did not make order repeating here because I'm only letting you manage one at a time. It doesn't seem to me that there would really be a user who would easily manage multiple orders in a single screen, right, because they've got the details. So I chose to just have it be a one order at a time scenario. You could use multiple orders on the screen. I get the details using a query, just querying the list, and then I'm adding the details to the order. I use qRules insert commands to insert instances of the repeating table, and then when instances of the repeating table are added, I set the SharePoint ID field. When the SharePoint ID field changes, then I go and I get the information from my secondary data source to populate the rest of the details. My Save button submits both to SharePoint, first the orders, and then the children, the order details. And in my order detail mapping, let me just get that open over here for you so you can see that. Pop that open in Notepad. Okay. Oh, look, nice and big. I try to make my resolution bigger before this in case anybody's laptop monitor has a smaller screen so you won't be scrolling all over the place. But then when I open stuff, sometimes it surprises me. So here is the piece of the mapping I want to show you, and that is the order number. I'm actually using a relative path to the order number, and I've also added a submit to a column called order lookup because I added a lookup column to my details list, and for that we need to submit the SharePoint ID of the order item. So again, I'm using a relative path to go from my order detail field up to the SharePoint ID in my order number in my orders field, and that way I can submit that to my order lookup. So if you've got a lookup, you can use submit to SharePoint to submit to it. You just need to make sure you're submitting the SharePoint ID of the item, okay, because that's what the lookup uses. And so let's take a quick preview here so I can show you that I did do my homework and that I'm just having the usual browser challenges that I think we've all run into a time or two. And so again, we'll select this customer, and we'll select, we'll create a new order. And as you can see, my customer, I feel so vindicated. As you can see, my customer does populate. And so I'm going to put a huge, huge order number in there because I think those have to be unique, and I've got no idea what I've got in there. That's probably too big, right? I'm probably going to break something. We'll try that. And then a date, again, we've got a new order, blah, blah. And, you know, in a real world scenario, when you got your customer, you probably populate all this stuff from your customer data. And we'll just get those gummy bears again, and whatever those happen to be, and get a few more things. And then let's see if we click Save. Now, the logic in the form should then populate the order with our newly submitted order. So, yeah, I definitely was just having browser problems, and I'm pretty certain they were going to be post-back related since we weren't getting any actual errors. So now we've got our new order that's in the system, and again, we can manage the details for it. We can add new items and resave them, so we can use this for an update as well. And like I mentioned, you can also add customers. So basically, that's the same kind of parent-child thing, but in a single form that doesn't require the web part to web part kind of a mashup thing going on. It submits to the lists. It's not a SharePoint list form. So I would say, obviously, the one solution, right, is working with what you already have, right, which is SharePoint and InfoPath. And the other solution is just taking it a step further, working with InfoPath and something you may already have. You might be a qRules user. If you are, I would suggest this approach simply because I feel like it's a little more cohesive. It's got a little more unity to it. So I actually seem to have managed to wrap up on time. Hopefully I gave you enough detail, and I'm going to share those slides back out. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to pop them up in the question and answer if you do. If not, it was great having you. I'm glad you could make it. I've got a final slide with some more links of places you can get more information. I see we've got a question. Oh, Patrick asked if I'd say that it's more cohesive and that it makes it more customizable and a better look. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, you've got the full impact of InfoPath. You've got the full power of InfoPath. So all of the things you can do in InfoPath Designer that are browser compatible, you're able to do here in this particular form. I mean, SharePoint list forms are pretty restricted. To me, obviously, as a developer and a pretty hardcore qRules user, it's restrictive just because they can't have any code, and which means no qRules. But also the fact that you can now manage this entire relationship. You can manage the customer, you can manage the orders, you can manage the order details. If you use qRules, refresh list items, you could even delete an order and delete the details. So definitely. And Bruce from Tampa's asked about a sample form, and yeah, sure. I'm going to reply with my email address at qdabra.com. So drop me an email if you're interested in that sample form, and I'll get it to you. It'll be injected with an expiring 4.2 beta, but it'll give you the form to kind of look at, so you can get a sense of how I approached these rules for sure. And if you wanted the SharePoint form that I kind of hacked up, you know, let me know. I'm happy to send you that one as well. So if there's nothing else, I'll reply to you, Patrick, officially. So that goes into the Q&A. If anybody else has any questions, feel free to pop them up, and I'm going to go ahead and stop recording, and I'll hang out for a few minutes. And again, you can check the Q&A from my email address and drop me an email if you're interested in one of those little sample forms that I used for the demo. I hope everybody has a great day.